Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Tea with Gwen. So today is the first in a new series entitled A Physician's Perspective. And my goal is to address or discuss topics, medical topics on conditions, therapies, and questions that you may have. So our first topic is going to be alkaline ionized water. Healthy or hoax? If you're watching this, then hopefully you have access to the PowerPoint, and we're going to just start on slide 2. So our objectives today will be to discuss the definition of alkaline ionized water, the claims that it's making in regards to health, and review the current evidence, which, to be honest, there isn't that much, relatively speaking. So there is naturally occurring alkaline water, which is basically mineral water. And the FDA requires that water has to have 250 parts per million TDS, also known as total dissolved solid, and come from a physically protected underground water source without exogenous minerals in order to be considered naturally occurring alkaline water, aka mineral water. Now, this natural alkaline water has a high concentration of minerals, and it's the concentration of minerals that determines the pH, which is going to be a bit higher than pure water. So, alkaline ionized water can come from any source, and oftentimes if you have a machine that you're using to turn your water more basic, then you're probably just using tap water. And so there aren't any added minerals to it outside of what is already there. And what you're creating is an artificially produced water with an altered pH. Okay, so without the minerals there, I'm not really sure if the effects that alkaline ionized water claims to have is really the same as naturally occurring alkaline water, but we'll get into that in a bit. So let's talk about the different beverages that we're often exposed to and what their pH is, just to get some relative understanding here. So sodas, for example, Coke, has a very low pH. It's quite acidic. Bottled water, I know many of you are fond of bottled water and feel it's better than tap water, but let's just look at the pH, okay? Ozorka is a common bottled water brand. It's actually much more acidic than pure tap water, and its pH is about 5. Other brands range from 6.2 to 6.9. Tap water usually is pretty neutral. So, for example, one study showed that Houston's water was 7.3 almost, and Pasadena was almost 7.6, and that's fine. Alkaline ionized bottled water, or actually I should correct that and say alkaline bottled water. Evermore is a naturally occurring mineral water that's bottled. So its pH is 8.78 and its TDS is 181. Essentia is an artificially produced, so it's using public water and ionizing that to create a higher pH. And that pH is around 10 and TDS is only 62. So as you can see there, because Essentia doesn't have the naturally occurring minerals that are in natural alkaline water, the TDS is much lower. So there are some reported benefits of natural alkaline water and alkaline diet. Okay. So the first is the concept that tooth decay can happen more in acidic environments. So your normal oral pH is around 6, whereas if it's lower to like 5.5, then you are at a higher risk of having caries. So alkaline water is basically neutralizing or making that more basic to tentatively prevent tooth caries. So that might be something I could kind of lean towards. However, once you've swallowed it and it's going through your digestive system, to be honest, your body has different ways of maintaining a normal pH, and each organ system has a healthy pH, whether that is acidic, neutral, or basic. Okay. So the second claim that some studies have shown, and again, this is all with natural alkaline water, is the potential protective factor in acid reflux patients. So pepsin is an enzyme basically that is a big part of digesting food, okay? And it acts in the stomach where there is an acidic setting, and that's fine. However, if you have reflux and you're refluxing your acidic juices past your stomach into your esophagus, then eventually, in the long run, you will damage your esophageal cells and potentially cause cancer. Okay. So one study that looked into this created an in vitro setting. So in vitro means outside of the human body. It's basically trying to mimic, but it's not exactly. We can't say that what's happening in vitro is automatically going to happen in vivo, which is in vivo is within the body. Okay. So what they found was that in this in vitro outside of the body setting, pepsin might kind of turn off, but it doesn't necessarily break down in neutral settings. And what they found was that in more alkaline settings, then it could denature the pepsin protein and prevent its digestive process. Okay, so basically if you've got pepsin exposure in places outside of the stomach, then essentially this alkaline water is going to shut it off, destroy it, and not affect the cells that shouldn't be affected by it. Okay. Now, so let's say that is true and the alkaline water continues to travel past your esophagus and into your stomach. What is going to happen there? If it were to work, then your pepsin wouldn't be working. But gladly, it's probably not going to work because your stomach is a very acidic environment and your body is going to be able to adjust whatever is entering to a more appropriate pH for the specific organ system that it is passing through. Okay. One more thing I want to point out is that in vivo settings, so within the body, pepsin is broken down and inactivated at a pH of 5. So your stomach, it works at pHs of 1.3 to 3.5. And so a pH of 5 is, relatively speaking, for the stomach, like nothing's going to work. The pepsin, which is supposed to break down, your food, isn't going to work. It's going to be denatured. It's going to be inactive, ineffective, essentially. So you don't need a basic environment for that to happen. Your body is designed to know what to do, okay? So that's where I don't really believe that that you need a basic environment in order to shut down pepsin protein or pepsin enzyme, even if it's outside of the stomach. I hope that makes sense. Okay, our last part is the alkaline diet, which some studies have shown to slow the progression of chronic diseases, for example, hypertension or high blood pressure, bone health, and muscle wasting. And I think a lot of that is related to calcium content and potassium content, not necessarily pH in and of itself. And things that you can sort of gear towards are like fruits and vegetables, and again, these good electrolytes like calcium, potassium. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone should go out and take a lot of calcium or a lot of potassium, because everything works well in moderation, but excess or deficiencies is what's going to cause health issues. Okay. All right, so as I sort of alluded to, there are normal variations of pH within the body. Just because you're drinking alkaline water doesn't mean that it's going to stay alkaline, because your body's going to adjust it. Overall, your blood pH is going to be pretty neutral, like 7.4-ish, 7 point something. And that's pretty well maintained by your kidneys and your respiratory system, okay? And then different areas of your body, it can be normal for things to be more acidic. For example, your skin needs a protective barrier, and that's going to be more acidic. Your stomach has to break down food, and so it has to be very acidic. And for us women, our vaginas, it needs a normal sort of, a normal flora to maintain a protective barrier, and that is also acidic. So adjusting everything to be neutral or adding alkaline materials to make things neutral is not necessarily a good thing. I'm not saying that the alkaline water is, gonna change everything to neutral, because actually the body is stronger than that, and it's probably going to adjust whatever you put into it to fit the pH that organ system should be. Okay. All right, so the next part I want to discuss will be related to the demonstrations that are often associated with distributors regarding alkaline ionized water. So if you've ever had one of them visit your home or seen a video of it, then oftentimes you've probably seen the oil and water demonstration and the vegetable and chlorine demonstration. Okay, before we go into that, let me just review fat absorption first, all right? And I tried to simplify this because honestly, you don't really need to know all the little details, okay? So how is fat absorbed? Before it can be absorbed, it has to be digested, okay? So there's a very long and complicated process that fat goes through your digestive system, and it involves a lot of different enzymes, okay? The stomach is a space where it can churn and mix up the contents that you've eaten, and after that, well, actually by doing that, it's breaking up these chunks of lipids into smaller droplets. And basically, by breaking it up into small pieces, it's increasing the surface area. So there's more room for enzymes to be able to work, okay? And then it passes that from the stomach into the small intestine, which is where the majority of lipid or fat digestion is going to happen. And here is where you'll have the release of bile salts, and it'll emulsify the liquids, thereby creating an even larger surface area to work on, where the pancreatic enzymes will actually be the one digesting the lipids and breaking it down, okay? In order to absorb your fat, there has to be a transport mechanism. So there's this creation of what we call micelles, or micelles, whatever, to transport it into the inside of your intestinal cells. And once it's inside the lumen, it goes through a repackaging process to go into your bloodstream. And from there, it will be used by different organ systems for different purposes. Your nervous system, that's very important, so cholesterol is important for it. And also your sexual and reproductive health. Cholesterol plays a big role in that as well. Okay, so let's go to the oil demonstration. And the claim in this demonstration is that if you mix oil and water, then things remain separated. And the assumption is that you can't clear the fat as well. And then you move over to oil and alkaline ionized water, where things seem to mix so well. And they're using that visualization to make consumers feel that it is allowing the fat to clear faster and somehow can contribute to weight loss. Okay. So the mixture you see there, it's essentially soap. It's what we call saponification, where if you mix an acid, which is the fat, with a base, which is the alkaline water, it's going to result in saponification or a soap-like mixture. Okay. Now, let's say you drink it anyways, or you've eaten your fat and you drink your alkaline water, and let's say it turns into a soapy mixture in your stomach. Well, to be honest, once it's in your stomach is so acidic that this mixture is again exposed to a very acidic environment and is going to have to go through the normal steps of fat digestion and absorption. So there's really no change that you're making in the process, to be honest. Okay. So, all right. Oh, I think there's something I forgot to talk about. Okay. Oh, we'll go to that later. Sorry. All right. Let's go to the second chlorine demonstration. Okay, or the chlorine demonstration, which is the second demonstration. So, okay. Before I discuss the demonstration, I think I have to explain the purpose of chlorine in drinking water. So a lot of people, or, there's a lot of false information out there to make society feel that chlorine in your drinking water is a horrible thing. The reality is that so back in the days, before chlorine was in drinking water, there was a higher risk for infections, okay, that was spread by water. So infections like typhoid, cholera, hepatitis, and Giardia, those are all microbial contaminants, and if you don't clean them, if you don't use chlorine to clean them out, basically you're going to put the rest of the population at a higher risk for waterborne infections. Okay. Now, there certainly is, concentrations that can be too high, but in general, the max concentration allowed is going to be 4 milligrams per liter. And for example, in Seattle, there's only like 0.08 milligrams per liter. You can look at your own local webpage to determine how much is in your source. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to say is that the amount of chlorine in drinking water is very low and very safe. And actually the max concentration of 4.0, WHO, which is the World Health Organization, I believe even allows up to 5.0. Okay. So what happens and why when you're washing produce, the amount of chlorine is stuck or absorbed into the produce, because that's what they're trying to scare you with, okay? So the reality is that say you're in agriculture and you have a farm and you've harvested all your produce. Before you can actually send it out and sell it, there is a washing process that you go through. And that washing process actually uses a higher chlorine concentration often. And they'll do that repeatedly, and then they'll kind of wash off the chlorine that's on there. And then they'll bring it out to the market. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that you do need that chlorine to clean your produce. And essentially, the reason that you can't detect chlorine in water that has already been used to wash produce is really just a normal reaction that they're using to exploit consumers into thinking that, oh wait, we think chlorine is bad, and so now that I've washed my produce, there's like no more chlorine in the water, so all that chlorine is in my produce, so that must be a terrible thing. But the reality is that vegetables and other produce have soils and organic debris that's going to react with chlorine and is going to reduce the amount of active chlorine in the water. So that's what you're seeing. So when they put the droplets of chlorine tester into the water that's already in use, that's why you don't detect the chlorine anymore. This is a normal reaction between produce and chlorine. And they're really just using that to give a visual effect and to kind of convince people of something that really isn't existing, or a danger that really isn't existing. Okay. All right. I wanted to point out a couple of research that I came across, specifically on alkaline ionized water and its effect on rats. All right. So the reality is that there aren't studies on alkaline ionized water in humans that I could find that were trustworthy. And while rats are not humans, they are a species that we often use in the scientific world to start things off and to have a basic understanding before we move on to human subjects. Okay, it's very common use, they're mammals, there's a lot of correlation. So in one specific article, they looked at rats that were given water with pH of 11.2 to 12. Now, if you recall, during the demonstration video, the first thing they go through is alkaline ionized water at pH of 11.5. That is the strong Kangen water, okay? So that is pretty much about the same as what these rats are being exposed to. That's also the one that the demonstrator claimed to help with weight loss, okay? So sure, they can have weight loss, at least based on this research. And what they're losing is anywhere from 1 to 29%. So these rats that were exposed to higher water pHs compared to the control over the course of a year, which is equivalent to 30 years of humans, what they found was that those who were exposed to alkaline water had 29% less body weight. Not all of them came up to 29, but basically there was a range, and the highest was 29. And 29% of weight loss is not a small number, and it's not something I would ever want to lose. For example, if I were 100 pounds, I would be, 71 pounds, which is not healthy, right? I wish I were 100 pounds. Anyhow, so the second finding was that in females, they notice more dull appearing and thin fur, and the amount of weight loss in females seemed to be greater than in males. And that mice who were exposed to higher pH at a younger age, so 6 weeks instead of 12 weeks of age, were more vulnerable to the adverse effects of alkaline ionized water. And lastly, those who were exposed to that really high pH, there were concerns of inflammatory reactions and cell injuries based on the loss of specific components of cells. So for example, ICAM1 and CD44. And you really don't have to know what that is. Those are basically just related to how they can test or look for signs of inflammatory reactions, etc. Okay. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, I'm not always going to drink super high alkaline water. I'll stick to more of like the 8 or the 9. Okay. Well, in a different study, using water with a pH of 8.7, which is very comparable to the normal Kangen water, they actually found necrosis of myocardium. And myocardium is basically your heart muscle, and the necrosis is like cell death in rats. So, take it as you will. In terms of, my perspective, that seems pretty scary to me, and I don't think that's something that I want to expose myself to or the rest of my family to, especially without any significant evidence in humans or truly beneficial evidence that I can find. All right, so outside, let's take this a little bit further, not just alkaline ionized water, but Kangen water itself. Why is it so much more expensive than another machine that does the same thing? Well, if you've noticed, the marketing method that they've used is actually, one that was used several decades ago. So for example, when Tupperware first came out, there were home demonstrations because it gave off the illusion that this was so special, this product is so wonderful, so elusive, so complex, that we have to send out a specialized person to show the consumer how it really works. And so that marketing method makes you feel like you're a part of something really special. And so that's part of the reason why they'll charge more. And you feel like, oh, I got this really special educational experience and discussion about this product. So it must be really good, and I'm willing to pay that price. So the other part that I want you to ask yourself is, there are other machines out there that can make alkaline ionized water, offering lifetime warranty. And if Kangen is so good and good enough to be that expensive, then why doesn't Kangen have a lifetime warranty? So just ask yourself that. So, in conclusion, the reported benefits of alkaline water naturally are limited. But I think that a lot of the effects, if there are truly any, has a lot to do with the minerals in the water as opposed to the pH of it itself. And in terms of alkaline ionized water, we know that in most households, what you'll be using is tap water. So there really isn't a difference in mineral content. You're just changing the pH. And in the end, what I really want to emphasize is that our body is very complex, it is a very smart system. And if it's working well, if you're healthy, then it's going to be smarter than any, supplement, any healthy water that I'm going to be able to give you, or any company is going to be able to give you. You're fully capable of regulating fluctuations in pH within your different organ systems. And if you have a serious illness that is causing unhealthy fluctuations in your pH, then we've got to treat the underlying condition. Changing the pH or neutralizing things sort of in a blind way isn't necessarily going to fix anything. So that's the end. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Feel free to ask questions. Look forward to it. But basically, those are the things I wanted to point out. And essentially, it's your money and it's your choice. But for me, I'm going to stick with my Seattle tap water and my tea. So I'll see you next time.